Joined now by Vicki McKenna for CultureCast. Vicki, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Duke.
We're glad to have you, and we've got an interesting story today. We've got, what is this with the progressive left and their fetishization of Joseph Stalin? We've got a professor in California, a self-described communist professor, who says that Joseph Stalin was one of the great leaders of the 20th century, and the professor says this is a balanced view. This is not unrealistic.
Yeah, he's saying that he takes a more nuanced, balanced view of Stalin and calls him one of the great leaders of the 20th century. I mean, you think about this. Swap out Stalin for Hitler, and this guy would be fired instantly. Yep. But praising a man who ordered millions of his own soldiers to their deaths, who ordered policies that created famine in his country that resulted in the deaths of millions, who then had policies that resulted in the imprisonment, torture, and death of additional millions of completely innocent people, millions and millions of dead people. I guess that's just the few eggs that needed to be broken on the way to utopia. I'm telling you what, it's a harassment of the mind and the soul that we have to accept, that the left can be, catastrophically stricken by the thoughts of people rejecting the outcome of an election or of a microaggression. But millions and millions of people dead, it's just a few eggs that needed to be broken. It's gobsmacking how ignorant, how soulless, and how numbed we have become to evil.
Well, think about who Stalin is. Here's a guy who, let's tick off the leftist boxes here. Was he a genocidal maniac? Yes. He starved to death about 11 million Ukrainians. He was a genocidal maniac. Was he a colonialist? Swallowed up almost all of Eastern Europe, swallowed up Poland, swallowed up all of those Kazakhstans. He's a colonialist. The left hates genocide. The left's supposed to hate genocide. They're supposed to hate colonization. Was he a racist? Absolutely. Did he treat people differently on the basis of their skins, including Jews? Was he absolutely a bigot? Of course he was. And he studied Christian theology and was in the seminary. I mean, this guy's got he talk about white privilege. And so, yet this professor is a fellow by the name of Astar Baer, B-A-I-R. I'm not going to speculate about his background or his ethnicity or his religion. He's decided that his view of Stalin as a great leader in the 20th century is a moderate view. He's not by any way, shape, or form twisting Stalin for his own political aims.
Well, Duke, remember when Bernie Sanders was still on the campaign trail and one of his campaign field directors was caught on mic by Project Veritas saying, hey, the gulags weren't that bad. These were places where people could express themselves. They could play music. They could perform dramas. The gulags were just places for people to go and understand their place in the mission of the revolution. This guy said that without irony. This professor believes what he believes, and he's not being questioned for it because we have become tolerant of the defense of communism. We've become tolerant of the defense of Marxism, which is why CRT is all over the schools. But one of the things that I'm actually quite worried about is the idea that there isn't an instant moral rejection of any of these statements or any of these beliefs. And people shrug their shoulders, the libertarians say, you believe what you believe. And we shouldn't try to figure out why evil is an ascendancy in the West and why it is tearing down the institutions and nobody's stopping it from happening in any real way that is likely to be successful. That's my bigger concern of a smart mouth ignoramus who is teaching kids that Stalin was a pretty good guy. I'm more worried about the fact that this telegraphs a huge piece of information about the past multiple generations that seem to not care about evil.
Yeah, your last point was the point, right? That it's one thing to have this as a private opinion, but he's teaching this opinion to his students, which gives rise to the fact that a new statistic out today, 2/3 of UK kids, Gen Z and the current generation, 2/3 support socialism over capitalism. And in this country, it's roughly the same for that generation. So why? And these kids support socialism, communism, without knowing its history, because you've got professors like this who do nothing but apologize for it. Around the break, we'll talk more about this and what it means for the future of this country. Back again with Vicki McKenna for CultureCast. So the broader issues we're talking about here is I got a professor at the University of Riverside City College in California. Astar Baer, B-A-I-R is his name. He's a self-professed communist. And he says that Stalin was a remarkable leader, right? Forget all the other historical facts about Stalin. There was a time in this country where saying, boy, Hitler was not that bad. He made the trains run on time. That was considered a bad thing. And it should be, right? Trying to justify Hitler's regime because certain aspects of it actually improved life for Germans in the 1930s. But now with communism, with socialism, not just the Russians, but China, there's an article in the news today I want you to comment on, even if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. But the premise of the article, the title of the article was Western progressives are pushing the Biden administration to do business with China and to ignore the brutality and the human rights abuses and to ignore their environmental policies. So the left wants China to be part of all of this because they're a communist country. But when it comes to China, we must ignore the gulags. We must ignore their pollution. But in America, we can't ignore that.
Well, Duke, it's not about actually caring about racism or actually caring about abuse or actually caring about false imprisonment or actually caring about human rights for the left. They don't care about any of that. This is simply about power. And it's okay that it contradicts itself. And it's okay that that drives people crazy because that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to create chaos in your mind. It's meant to have you fight yourself so that you can't fight back against them while they use whatever means necessary and by any means necessary to rise to power. This is just about power dynamics. And if we can understand it in that and recognize that they don't care about the contradictions, that none of this makes it to care about the contradictions and to point out the contradictions and expect the left to care is to assume that they are actually being honest about caring about Black people, caring about Muslims, caring about women, caring about gay people, caring about downtrodden folks who are poor. They don't give a damn about any of those groups. And I think if people, sort of proceeded from that, they might be easier to fight because we get all tied up in trying to defend a policy that might harm a minority group because the left claims the mantle of caring for minorities. They don't. None of their policies have produced any results. It's time to start rejecting their claim to the moral high ground because they're claiming it under false pretenses.
Well, I mentioned to you a couple of months ago in my class, I had a summer class, a Maymester class. I had a student in that class who must have been 23, 24 years old, who we were talking about these very issues, and he was defending Stalin. He was defending the Soviet Union. He was defending the communists. And when we brought that up, I actually brought it up. I said, because he said that Stalin, at one point he made the remark that Stalin didn't kill anybody. And so I mentioned the starving to people. He said, Stalin didn't kill anybody personally. In other words, Stalin didn't take a gun, stick it to somebody's head, and blow their head off. That for him, the kind of things Che Guevara used to do. That for him, the fact that Stalin never pulled a trigger meant that he was innocent of all those crimes. He actually said there's no evidence that Stalin killed anybody. I brought up 11 million dead, starved to death Ukrainians, and he denied it. And it was interesting. There's a young girl sitting in front of him. She hadn't said anything all semester, but she raised her hand and she said, my grandmother was in the Holodomor, and went on a very eloquent explanation of what happened. Did that change his mind? No, he kept grumbling and muttering under his breath the entire semester. But this is what you're seeing now. What 20 years ago would have been unthinkable is now common practice. America, in the eyes of these young kids, is far worse than Hitler's Nazi Germany, and the great murderers of human history, Mao and Stalin, are heroes now.
Well, and Duke, he didn't even care that he didn't make sense. He didn't care. It wasn't about making sense. It wasn't about having, he made a statement. He couldn't justify his statement. He got shot down by a woman whose family member had actually experienced the Ukrainian famine, right? It didn't matter to him. He closed off, he put the shutters over his eyes and his brain, and he just shook it off. And they've been taught to do this. Young people have been taught to revel in their ignorance of history, to revel in their lack of logic, because these are all vestiges of Western civilization, white supremacy, white privilege, male privilege, toxic masculinity, whatever. Logic, debate, history, all of these things are to be rejected. So he was probably feeling pretty good about himself for having known nothing and not even maybe even realized he was in a debate he lost. But it's something you said a little bit earlier, and that was he defended Stalin because he claims Stalin never put a gun to anybody's head, which is probably untrue. Stalin probably did actually put many guns to many heads. But what if you had swapped out the word Hitler for Stalin in that sentence? He would have been run out of the school. And I kind of, it's a shame that he didn't, that one of the students or something didn't think to just swap out the word Hitler and ask him what he thought about that.
The simple fact remain at the end of this segment, Vicki, is that socialism is our destiny. Communism is our destiny, and unless something in the schools changes really, really, really fast.
Yeah, radically. And honestly, I don't know if there's anything that can be done to fix the schools. But the more people who get their kids out of the schools, get their kids away from those environments, pick, very, very carefully the higher education that they would want to expose their kids to. Unless people start taking this seriously, the left has taken it seriously. Unless the right starts taking the issue of education seriously, we're done as a republic.